Welcome to Women Lead, a production of the Women of Color Empowerment Institute. We are your hosts. I'm Michelle Austin Pammy.
I'm Bernadette Norris Weeks.
And I'm Kathy Eggleston.
Today we will be speaking with Bacardi Jackson, who leads the Children's Rights Practice Group for the Southern Poverty Law Center.
These days, everyone is talking about education. Some of the numerous issues of interest include book bans, teacher indoctrination, violence in our schools, and the Supreme Court's decision ending affirmative action.
Well, there's a lot going on right here in Florida. There was the elimination of an AP African American history class simply because some folks deemed that it had no educational value. Can you believe that?
No, I can't. No.
But, this is just one example of what's going on in Florida. We're looking at any parent could decide to remove a book from a library, from a school library, or from a reading list because the content makes that parent feel uncomfortable.
That is one example of why we and other organizations like ours need to take a hard look at educating the community and making sure that history, real history, is out there and available to children, to families, in alternative areas outside of the school system.
Well, I'm one of those members of the community who need to be educated. For me, these changes are happening quicker than I can keep up with them. They are crazy sounding sometimes.
Sometimes
they're egregious, and I hear a lot of fears and a lot of anger, but from the general news media, sometimes not so much facts. We need to get and give our community the facts about what's going on.
I have to say, we can try to do that. We can definitely tell our community what changes in the law are taking place, how it may be affecting them. But I have to say, I don't think it's up to us to be educating the community on things like African American history, because we can't replace an entire school system.
No, we can't, but we can do our part given the climate that exists right now. And hopefully some of these poor decisions that are being made by government can be reversed. And I know that there are lawsuits in place and some other things that hopefully will correct this egregious activities that's taking place with our state right now. Well, we have the perfect person who will be able to lead us through these difficult questions and discussions. She is an expert in this area, and we can't wait to hear from Bacardi Jackson right after these messages. So stay tuned. At the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, our mission is to enhance and expand leadership by women of color. We do this in a variety of different ways, including but not limited to providing mentorship opportunities for young professionals where we assist in helping to create paths to leadership. We empower women to develop capacities for social change. We produce programs that promote heritage awareness, and we provide training opportunities for business and government. Our institute holds seminars focused on professional success techniques, and we host many other events such as our popular Advocates for Change and Leaders Connect. The Women of Color Empowerment Institute publishes a magazine called Women Lead. Our signature event is the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, a yearly conference where hundreds of leaders gather from all across the United States and beyond. To learn more about membership and how you can support our programs or be a sponsor of the Women Lead TV, visit us at nationalwomenofcolor.com. Again, that's nationalwomenofcolor.com.
The law office of Austin Pammies Norris Weeks Powell is a full-service law firm practicing in the area of governmental law, including the representation of municipalities, civil litigation, personal injury, real estate, and corporate transactional matters. With over 100 years of collective experience, our attorneys are admitted to practice before state courts, federal courts, and the United States Supreme Court. We are conveniently located in downtown Fort Lauderdale and can be reached at 954-768-9770. Or for more information about the law firm of Austin Pammies Norris Weeks Powell, visit our website at apnwlaw.com. That's apnwlaw.com.
Welcome back to Women Lead. Our guest today is Bacardi Jackson. Bacardi leads the Children's Rights Practice Group for the Southern Poverty Law Center. She oversees work dedicated to protecting children by stopping the school-to-prison pipeline and ensuring equitable access to mental health services and high-quality public education. She has been the Florida managing partner for the Tucker Law Group and has practiced with the white shoe law firms of Morgan Lewis and King and Spalding. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. And Bacardi, welcome to the show, my sister.
Welcome, Bacardi.
One of our charter members of Women of Color.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's
Absolutely.
been a great ride. Bacardi, we are so happy that you've chosen to sit with us today. You have done so much work as an attorney in various practice areas, including your current work with children's rights. Education is such an important component of that. We'll be talking to you about the threat to our children's education today and hopefully what we can do about it.
Bacardi, I am going to start with a sentence I never thought I would utter, let alone on television. Let's talk about book banning. What is going on in the state of Florida and potentially beyond?
Thank you for asking that. We are in a pretty dire situation in the state of Florida. Some of us are calling this ground zero for the threat against civil rights in our nation. We are seeing the rearing up of a repressive form of government, which is challenging people's rights and trying to control what people are doing. And so book bans are one of the tools that's being used right now in order to destabilize public education and to try to control the narrative so that we don't see the continued movement towards greater racial justice. So we are seeing book bans happening across our state, and actually we see legislation being proposed across the nation. And sadly, one of the things that happens in Florida is you get a model and other people in other states tend to follow that model. So here in Florida, we're seeing over 1,000 books have been challenged and are being pulled from the shelves. And it doesn't take much. All it takes is a complaint from one person. They don't even have to necessarily be in the school district or from that particular district. And they are able to have books removed from the shelves, to have information denied to children. And it's typically the books that are being targeted are books about race, books about LGBTQ people, and what some people are mislabeling or calling pornographic as a way to, again, also attack educators.
Well, we know that the Florida Constitution has some of the strongest language of any constitution in the country when it pertains to education. And that was put in place by the voters, right? So what I want to ask you, and I think it's just important to read the actual language from the Constitution because it really tells us what Florida voters wanted to see in terms of our public school system and how broad they wanted to educate kids. And it says, Article 9, for instance, says, adequate provision shall be made by law for a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality education of free public schools that allow students to obtain a high-quality education. Do you think right now this is being threatened?
Yes, sadly, and I think you've nailed it. This is one of the strongest provisions that you see when you look at constitutions across our country. Every single state in our nation recognizes the fundamental right to public education. Sadly, we have not yet as a nation moved to recognizing it as a federal right, but there are some proponents and advocates who are still trying to push for that, and we sorely need that. But as of right now, what we are seeing in Florida, and you're right as to the history, this was a vote that was put to the state of Florida voters, and it was in response to a decision by the Supreme Court of Florida that they could not measure, and therefore it was not, what the word is, justiciable, to enforce adequate education. And so when the Constitutional Revision Commission recommended this language, the voters supported it and wanted to see us institute a public education system that includes every one of those adjectives, that each one means something, that it is uniform. That means we don't have dual systems of education, a public track and a private track that we are funding with our public dollars, that it is effective and efficient and safe. It should be safe for all children, not just some children, that it is secure. It should be securing the rights of educators, the rights of children, and especially that it is a free public education. We need to protect public education as a fundamental cornerstone of democracy. And so we have far too often allowed this slippery slope to happen where we are not standing up and fighting for our public education system.
But Claudia, right now, I understand that Florida has established a new civics training program for teachers where they're paying teachers $700 to come attend this program where they learn things about the originalist interpretation of the Constitution, to learn about Christian nationalism, to learn that there shouldn't really be a separation of church and state. Those types of things, they're paying people to attend them. Are they having the impact on teachers where teachers are now sharing that information with their students? What's happening with that exactly?
Well, this was something that was started last summer, and we saw that there were thousands of teachers who attended these trainings, and we don't blame them because they were being offered a substantial sum. When you look at a teacher's salary, $700 is not a small amount. And on top of that, the teachers who attended actually got a check for $3,000. So it's a substantial portion of the teacher's salary in Florida, $3,700 to subject yourself to the indoctrination that our current administration is pushing as to the civics education. And as you said, it focused on issues around separation of state. It described that it shouldn't be offense to separating church and state, but more like a porous gate or something that you could slip through on both sides. And
that it shouldn't be a wall,
right?
Basically.
No walls, no walls.
Kind
It needs to be something you can train, And so it really attacked the fundamental principles that have been foundational for so much law, for so much precedent in our nation, that you do separate church and state, that we should not be funding the indoctrination or enforcing religious views on children or on anybody. And so that's a really important principle to protect. But it didn't stop there. There were other things in the civics education, things like teaching that slavery was, some kind of immigration, and that it wasn't so bad in America. They actually had graphics that showed big arrows going to Canada and to the West Indies, and a very small arrow of the slave trade hitting the U.S. So it was offensive at best when you think about what they were trying to get civics teachers to buy into to then pass along to our children, which is just a spin of what the history actually is.
Is that where they put that spin on slavery as being beneficial to Black folks?
Now that's a new one. That one just came about.
You can't keep up with it.
You can't keep up with it. It is. I often say our work is like responding to a fire hose of really bad ideas. You just feel the pressure of this constant force. And the latest is that the Department of Education has propounded standards for African American studies. And so under Florida law, our schools are required to teach Black history. But what that Black history is now is very questionable. One of those things that you just mentioned is some just unbelievable notion that we should be teaching children that people who were enslaved somehow benefited from that enslavement because they gained personal skills that helped them personally. Which of course is an oxymoron, because if you are enslaved, anything you have, any skills you have, any labor you produce is not for your own benefit. So it doesn't even make any logical sense. Beyond that, they are also included in their provisions that they want to teach people that the massacres, and there were several atrocious massacres that occurred across Florida and lots that occurred across our nation, where Black cities and towns were burned to the ground, where people were just murdered outright. And now that is to be taught as not only about the violence against Black people, but violence by Black people, as if we are somehow responsible for the hatred and the racial oppression that was so egregious that it had to snuff out our lives just because we were succeeding.
Alrighty. that is a lot to take in. Again, I never expected to hear what I'm hearing in the current era, but this is not just about Florida. These things are traveling. So tell us a little bit about the process of when these things take hold in one place, how they travel and endanger other areas.
Thank you for that question, Kathy. Yes, what we are seeing in my organization, we work across 5 states of the Deep South. We work in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And Florida has become ground zero because there are very few checks and balances on the current administration. And so we have a very skewed legislature that is not reflective of the actual population of Florida in terms of political views. And that's as a result largely of gerrymandering and sort of this institutionalized maintaining of power. We also have a Supreme Court that is quite conservative, and most of the issues that we bring, we would see a 7-0 court against us. And then we have, of course, an executive who has a very strong political agenda that he is using Florida taxpayer dollars to pay for. And so because of that, we see that Florida is able to be a testing ground for a lot of really bad ideas. I call Florida the bastion of bad ideas. And we see that all kinds of things are being proposed here and tested out. If they can get through it here, if they can test it and make sure it can withstand court challenges, then that's something that you will see other states start to pick up. We've seen that with the mask issues. We've seen that with the book banning. We've seen it with the anti-CRT movement, which was also a joke since CRT is never taught in K-12 education. But, you know, the danger of it is that we are creating a whole generation of people who will not be able to function well in the rest of our nation. If we are in these states that are allowing this kind of repressive ideology to take hold, if we are allowing our children to be denied and deprived of basic truth and history and honest education, they won't be fully equipped. They're not getting the high quality education that's promised in our Constitution. They're getting anything but that. And the other thing that is really interesting to me about this is not new. So while we are seeing this travel across the country, we are also seeing this travel across time. This is a repeat of history. The very history they don't want us to learn is the history they are studying to re-implement all over again. And so when you go back and look at something, for instance, like the Lost Cause. The Lost Cause was a movement that was started by the Daughters of the Confederacy. And that movement was in response to this growing movement to recognize and appreciate the rights of Black people and move towards a greater racial equity and justice. And you saw the same thing happen after George Floyd. After George Floyd, we saw a worldwide movement that said Black lives matter. Not only do Black lives matter, but we're going to take down the systems and structures that have been oppressing Black people for centuries. We're not going to just say it was a bad apple at the police department. It was one bad thing that happened in a town somewhere where some angry mob got upset and burned down. No, this was systemic. It was structural. It was baked into the laws. It was baked into the education system that made people believe the laws were just. And so this is a repeat of that exact same history where you saw the Daughters of the Confederacy wrote curricula. They wanted to use the textbooks in order to indoctrinate white supremacist ideas into our children so that, in their own words, it could live in perpetuity. That's when we saw the erection of all of the Confederate monuments. That's when we just saw the complete rewrite of Confederate history in order to try to sanitize this history and pretend like it was noble and honorable what the South was doing.
And the South didn't win, by the way. The South did not win the war. Okay? Just put that on the record.
So I'm listening to you and I'm stuck somewhere. One of the things that bothers me in this conversation is, what's the rationale for trying to have a positive spin on slavery? What's the thought process? What are we trying to prove, those of us who are rewriting history such that slavery had a positive spin to it? What's the rationale?
Well, when you think about it, we had our whole economic system, not even just in this country, but worldwide economic system was built on the backs of enslaved people and the institution of slavery. And if you were to actually take responsibility for that, imagine what that bill would look like. Imagine what you would owe people who you don't just justify and say they were somehow inherently inferior and deserved what they got, but that you said, we actually stole something from them,
right?
And we need to make amends for what we took. We owe you something for what we took from your ancestors. Imagine if you had people.
Yeah, think about it. Reparations has come back in the forefront since the George Floyd murder. We're talking more about reparations. We're talking about what happened in Oklahoma. We're talking about land being taken from ancestors and wrongly and property rights and these terrible laws that were in place to basically take back anything Black people were able to gain in terms of property. We weren't having those conversations so much before the George Floyd murder. And so I think that this is, just like you said, it's an attempt to just roll back because they want to change the minds. And I think if these folks think they can change the minds of people, we don't owe you anything, so therefore rewriting history really benefits us. That's the goal, right?
It benefits entrenching the current power dynamic, right? One of the things that I think was intolerable for people who are conservative in this way is that when you saw what happened with George Floyd, that movement wasn't just Black people.
That's true.
That movement was worldwide. White people, brown people, indigenous people, everybody said, we are going to change the existence of this current system. You saw young people especially getting excited about how do we dismantle a system. And if you think about what happens when you dismantle a system, the people in power start to topple down. And so if you want to entrench your power, if you want to entrench your privilege and pretend like you earned it, you have got to repress and you've got to change history.
I'm going to take you back to education in Florida for a minute, because the universal voucher system is something that we're not really talking enough about. And I think that you could bring some light to it. Like, who is it benefiting?
Thank you so much for asking. That's one of the main buckets of work that we do. And it's really important work, but hard work to get people to get excited about. It's hard for people to really want to delve into the funding mechanisms of our education system. And what is happening right now is Florida is one of a handful of states that has now instituted a universal voucher system. Before that happened this past legislative session, Florida was leading the nation by far, spending and siphoning away from our public dollars $1 billion every single year into private schools. And now, with this universal voucher system, which essentially what that does is it takes the cap off. It says you no longer have to have an income cap to receive these vouchers. At first, it was based on your income, and only some families could get and be eligible for this money. But now it's anybody. Now it's all of the millionaires who already have their children in private schools and who would be in private schools no matter what. But now we're going to bankroll that. Now we're going to take the taxpayer dollars. And ironically, when you think about the systems of taxes in our nation and in our state, we typically live in regressive tax states. We don't have an income tax. We tax the poor to support the rich. So when you're thinking about our tax dollars, where they're coming from, who's footing the bill for millionaires to send their children to school, it's the poor people of Florida. And so this universal voucher system, the Florida Policy Institute has estimated that it's going to now cost us not just $1 billion, but $4 billion a year at least. And almost $2 billion of that is going to go to pay families who are already in private schools. So we're getting nothing new for this. We're just deciding we're going to bankroll wealthy families and further divide and further dismantle public schools. And that's what's really at issue. That's the story, that the dot that we have to connect. That this is not about choice for family. This is not about freedom for parents to choose the best thing. This is about dismantling public education in our public schools. When we defund our public schools, then we can further entrench the segregation academies, which is what voucher system started out as. The whole history of vouchers was we wanted to make sure we didn't have to have white children going to school with black children. So the state funded that. The state said, here, white families, we're going to give you money so you can send your children to what was literally called segregation academies. Today, that's still the purpose of what we see private schools doing. We still see private schools having a segregative effect, not only as between public schools and private schools, but within private schools themselves. Most kids who are attending private schools, 75% or more are 75% of or more of that school is either predominantly black and brown or predominantly white. It's not having an integrative effect. It's not having a positive effect. Parents who have children with disabilities, they check their rights at the door when they go to a private school. They don't have those rights, and they will often surprisingly get a bill and say, if you want us to provide the special education services that are required by federal law in a public school, you're going to have to foot the bill for that. So we are seeing also we're funding discrimination. Private schools can justify not allowing in LGBTQ children or firing LGBTQ teachers. And we're funding that. That's from our public dollars. We are funding that discrimination. We should have a problem with that. We are also
have a problem.
And we're funding no accountability. What's public schools? What schools should exist on our public dollars that has no accountability to a school board anywhere? And we can't even issue public records requests and find out how they're spending our tax dollars. So there's so many issues that don't get talked about when we start talking about vouchers.
And so the question I want to ask you is, you're obviously one of the most knowledgeable professionals in the country on these issues. We know you. We know that you work 24/7. You are one of the hardest working warriors for social justice. We know. We can't allow you to do it alone. What does the community need to do to stand up for our own interests
And support the work that you're doing every day?
First of all, is be educated. Figure out, pay attention to, read about what's happening in our Florida legislature. Read about what's happening at your local school district. Read about what's happening at your local school. Even if you don't have children in that school, because guess what? The people who are going around banning books don't have children in those schools. And show up.
We have heard so much today, and this has been a real conversation about our education system and what we can do to fight back, to push back, right? So that's our time, and until the next time, be empowered.